A mysterious night and a question that will haunt you. What if the greatest promise you ever made cost you everything? Think about it. Not just money. Not just comfort. Imagine swearing an oath so powerful, so absolute that breaking it is unthinkable, but keeping it would destroy you. This is not just a question. It's a reality. And it happened to a man named Jephthah. Tonight, we step into his world, a world of exile, war, faith, and an oath that changed history forever. The night was calm. Unnaturally calm. Above, a sky stretched endlessly, pierced by 1,000 frozen stars. Below, the land of Gilead lay in silence, untouched by the chaos that tomorrow would bring. Some say that destiny whispers in the quiet moments before history is made. If that's true, then Jephthah must have heard it that night. A warrior stood alone beneath the heavens, his mind heavy with thoughts of war. The fate of a nation rested on his shoulders. He had spent his entire life fighting, against rejection, against enemies, against the ghosts of his past. But the greatest battle? That one was yet to come. And he had no idea that when it arrived, it wouldn't be fought on the battlefield. It would be fought in his heart. At this moment, Jephthah was a commander, a warrior chosen to lead his people into battle. But just years before, he had been nothing. An outcast, a man cast aside, forced to fend for himself in a world that never wanted him. Now, those same people who had rejected him were begging for his help. He would fight. He would lead them. He would win. But victory was not enough. He wanted more. And so, in the stillness of that night, with war looming on the horizon, Jephthah did something bold. He made a promise, a vow to God. Lord, if you give me victory over my enemies, I will offer you a sacrifice. Whatever comes out of my house first when I return home will be yours. A warrior's prayer, a desperate plea. He never expected who would greet him when he returned. He never imagined the cost. What would you do? Now pause for a second. Put yourself in Jephthah's place. You make a promise to God, to the universe, to fate itself. And then one day that promise comes knocking. But it demands more than you ever thought possible. Would you keep it, or would you break it? Jephthah made his choice, and history never forgot. But before we get there, let's go back to where it all began. Born to be cast out, the tragic beginning of Jephthah before he was a warrior, before he was a leader, before his name became both legend and warning. Jephthah was nothing, not in the eyes of men at least. To them, he was a mistake, a stain on a family name, someone to be erased. But to God? God was writing a different story. Jephthah was born in the land of Gilead, a rugged, hilly region east of the Jordan River. It was a land of warriors and shepherds, a place where strength and honor meant everything. His father, Gilead, was a man of status, a leader, a man of power. But Jephthah's mother? She was a prostitute. And in ancient Israel, that mattered. The blood of Gilead flowed through Jephthah's veins, but no one cared. He wasn't the son of a respected wife. He wasn't born into honor. He was an inconvenience, a reminder of something shameful. And his half-brothers, true sons of Gilead, born from his lawful wives, made sure he knew it. Every single day, they mocked him, shoved him aside, treated him as if he didn't exist. But Jephthah existed. And one day, when his father was gone, his brothers made sure he wouldn't exist there any longer. You are not one of us. It wasn't just whispers behind his back anymore. It was direct. You don't belong here, Jephthah. You're not one of us. You will have no inheritance in our father's house because you are the son of another woman. It didn't matter that he was strong, that he had their father's blood, that he had done nothing wrong. The law was on their side. A child born outside of marriage had no legal claim to an inheritance. No land, no home, no future. And so they did what society allowed them to do. They drove him out, not just from their house, not just from their land, from everything he had ever known. Jephthah, son of Gilead, had become a man with no name, no family, no people. He was an outcast. And outcasts? They didn't survive. Imagine that moment. One day you have a home, a future, a family even if they despise you. And the next, you have nothing. Jephthah didn't just lose his inheritance. He lost his identity. In the ancient world, a man without land, without family, was a man already halfway to the grave. He had no protection, no way to make a living, no place to sleep at night. And yet, Jephthah didn't die. He didn't break. He adapted. And that's when his story took an unexpected turn. Jephthah wandered eastward, far from Gilead, until he reached the land of Tob, a place for men like him, a place where society's rejects gathered, the desperate, the outlaws. And Jephthah? He fit right in. But unlike the others, he didn't just survive there. He thrived. At first, he was just another exile, another man with nowhere to go. But soon, something changed. The other outcasts, criminals, thieves, mercenaries began to look at him differently. They saw something. Strength, charisma, leadership. Slowly, he became more than just one of them. He became their commander. And when men with nothing to lose follow you, you become dangerous. Jephthah built a reputation, a feared, battle-hardened warrior leading a band of ruthless fighters. A man you didn't want as your enemy. A man powerful enough that the very people who cast him out would one day come begging for his help. But that part of the story? That comes later. For now, remember this: Jephthah was born unwanted, cast aside. But God wasn't finished with him yet. From exile to power, the making of a warrior, they thought they had erased him. They believed that by casting him out, they had ended his story. But Jephthah was not the kind of man who disappeared. He had lost his home, his family, his name. But what he gained was something far more powerful. And soon, the world would know his name not as a forgotten outcast, but as a leader, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. Jephthah's journey led him far from the land of Gilead, far from the people who had abandoned him. His destination? Tob, a harsh, rugged land to the east. A place where laws were few and only the strong survived. It was the kind of place where men went when they had nowhere else to go. And Jephthah? He was exactly that kind of man. He had no inheritance, no protection, no allies. But he did have something else. A will to survive. And in a land like Tob, that was the only currency that mattered. Jephthah quickly learned the ways of Tob. It was a land of exiles, fugitives, and mercenaries. A land where strength ruled and weakness meant death. And yet, something strange happened. Instead of being swallowed by the chaos, Jephthah rose above it. At first, he was just another nameless warrior, another man trying to make it through the night. But then, men started following him. At first, it was a few. Then more. They saw something in him. He wasn't just strong. He was clever. He was fearless. And most importantly, he was a leader. How does an outcast become a commander? It wasn't just about fighting. It was about commanding respect. Jephthah wasn't born into leadership like other men. He didn't inherit it. He earned it. Through battles. Through victories. Through choices that set him apart. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a strategist. When others fought with brute force, Jephthah fought with his mind. He studied his enemies. He predicted their moves. He turned their own tactics against them. And soon, the men of Tob, outlaws, exiles, desperate men with no future, became something else. They became an army. His army. And Jephthah? He became their leader. There's a strange thing about rejection. It either destroys a man, or it makes him unstoppable. For years, Jephthah had been the unwanted one. But now, he had built something no one could ignore. His name carried fear. His presence commanded respect. He had gone from a nameless exile to a leader of warriors. And while the people of Gilead may have forgotten him, they would soon remember, because fate was about to knock on Jephthah's door. And the same people who cast him out, they were about to come begging for his help. Fate calls. The people who rejected him now beg for his help. For years, Jephthah had been a ghost to his people. A name they never spoke. A mistake they had erased. But fate has a way of turning the tables. And now, the very people who had cast him out were about to come knocking at his door. Not to mock him, not to reject him, but to beg him. Because war was coming. And without him, they had no hope. The land of Gilead was in crisis. The Ammonites, one of Israel's fiercest enemies, had declared war. And it wasn't just another skirmish. This time, the Ammonites were coming for everything. Burning villages, slaughtering families, claiming land that had belonged to Israel for generations. And Gilead? They were losing. Their warriors were weak. Their leaders were divided. Panic spread like wildfire. They needed a fighter. A leader. Someone who could stand against the Ammonites and turn the tide of war. And there was only one man with that kind of power. Jephthah. The same elders of Gilead who had once ignored Jephthah's suffering now stood at the border of Tob, waiting, hoping. They found him exactly where they had left him, among warriors, among men who followed him without question. But now Jephthah was not the boy they had driven away. He was a man, a leader, a commander. And when he saw them standing there, looking desperate, looking afraid, he smiled, not with warmth, with understanding, because he knew exactly why they had come. And it was his turn to speak. "Now you need me?" Jephthah walked toward the elders, his voice calm, measured. "So let me get this straight. You cast me out. You took away my inheritance. You made sure I had nothing. And now that you're in trouble, you come to me?" The elders shifted uncomfortably. "We were wrong," one of them admitted. "But we need you now. If you lead our army against the Ammonites, we will make you our ruler, the head of all Gilead." It was an offer of power, but Jephthah wasn't a fool. He knew desperation when he saw it. So he leaned in ice sharp. "Let me be clear," he said. "If I fight for you, if I risk my life to save the people who threw me away, then I will not just be your temporary leader. I will rule you, completely. No conditions. No second chances. Do you agree?" The elders didn't hesitate. "Yes," they said. "We swear it before the Lord." And just like that, the outcast became the ruler. The exile became the commander. The unwanted one became their only hope. But Jephthah knew something they didn't. Winning a war wasn't just about swords. It was about something greater. And before the battle even began, he was about to make a decision that would change his life forever. The fateful vow, a promise that could not be broken. Power, revenge, redemption. Jephthah had gained all three in a single moment. The same people who had cast him out were now calling him their leader. Their fate rested in his hands. But Jephthah knew better than to trust men. He had learned the hard way that loyalty was fleeting, that promises could be broken, that people only respected strength. So before he led them into battle, before he stood against the Ammonites, Jephthah sought a power greater than any army. And he made a vow that would change everything. The battlefield was days away, but Jephthah knew that war wasn't just about weapons. It was about destiny. He had won many fights before, but this wasn't just another battle. This was his chance to prove himself not just to the elders of Gilead, but to God. And so, standing alone under the vast, silent sky, Jephthah did what warriors have done for centuries. He made a promise, not to his men, not to the people who had begged for his help, but to the only one who could guarantee victory. "Lord, if you give me success, if you hand the Ammonites over to me, then I will give you a sacrifice. Whatever comes out of my house first to greet me when I return home, it will be yours. I will offer it as a burnt offering." Why did he make this vow? At first, it seems like a reckless promise. But Jephthah was a man of war. He understood deals. He understood bargains. And in the ancient world, warriors often made vows before battle. It was a way of declaring faith, a way of showing complete surrender to divine will. Jephthah believed he was sealing his victory. He thought, perhaps, that an animal would be the first to greet him when he returned home. A lamb, a goat, a sacrifice fitting for God. He never imagined, never considered, that it might be something else, something he could never bear to lose. But a vow to God is unbreakable. And Jephthah? He was about to learn what that really meant. Victory and the terrible realization the battle was fierce. Steel clashed against steel. War cries filled the sky. The earth trembled under the weight of marching armies. Jephthah led from the front, his sword cutting through enemy lines like fire through dry grass. He was not just fighting for his people. He was fighting for his name, for his legacy, for the promise he had made. And when the dust settled, he had won. The Ammonites lay scattered, their forces crushed. Israel was victorious. The people cheered his name. They hailed him as their savior. But Jephthah did not celebrate, because deep in his heart he knew the real battle had just begun. Victory should have felt sweet, but each step toward home felt heavier than the last. His men marched behind him, singing songs of triumph. Yet Jephthah remained silent. The words of his vow echoed in his mind. "Whatever comes out of my house first to greet me, I will offer as a burnt sacrifice." At the time, those words had felt like a sign of faith, a declaration of devotion. But now they felt like a noose tightening around his throat. He had no way of knowing what or who would greet him, and a dark feeling settled in his chest. A feeling that fate was cruel, that God was listening, and that the price of his victory would be far greater than he ever imagined. Jephthah's home came into view. His heart pounded in his chest. The people of Gilead had gathered, waiting to welcome their victorious leader. And then, through the crowd, through the open doors of his house, she appeared, running, laughing, dancing, his daughter, his only child. The joy on her face was radiant. She twirled in celebration, tambourine in hand, rushing toward her father. "Welcome home, father," she cried. "You have won." But Jephthah fell to his knees. His breath caught in his throat, his vision blurred. This was the moment that would define him. And in that instant, he realized the terrible truth. His vow, his unbreakable, irreversible vow. It had claimed his own daughter. No, no, a cry of anguish tore from Jephthah's lips. He ripped his clothes, an ancient sign of grief beyond words. "No, my daughter, you bring me to my knees. I have made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot take it back." The crowd fell silent. The celebration stopped. And his daughter? She did not run. She did not beg. She simply looked at her father and understood. She could have screamed. She could have pleaded. But she did neither. Instead, she stood tall, strong. "Father," she said, "if you have made a vow to the Lord, then do to me as you have promised. But grant me this one thing, let me go to the mountains for 2 months. Let me mourn the life I will never have." Not the life she was about to lose, the life she would never get to live. Jephthah could barely breathe as he nodded. She turned away, disappearing into the hills with her friends, her laughter now replaced with sorrow. For 2 months she mourned, and when she returned, she faced her fate. Did he really sacrifice her? And now the question that haunts history. Did Jephthah truly offer his daughter as a burnt sacrifice? Or was there another way? Some believe he did, that his faith, his honor-bound oath, forced his hand, that he carried out the sacrifice just as he promised. Others believe he gave her to the Lord in another way, that instead of death, she was dedicated to a life of service in the tabernacle, never to marry, never to have children. Her mourning, they say, was not for her death, but for the family she would never have. We may never know the full truth, but one thing is certain. Jephthah's vow, his desperate promise, had cost him everything. Jephthah won the war, but at what cost? A single vow, made in the heat of desperation, had rewritten his destiny. And so the question remains, what are we willing to sacrifice for victory? What promises do we make without understanding the price? And if that price comes knocking, would we be willing to pay it? The mystery. What really happened? A father, a daughter, promise that could not be broken. The Bible tells us that Jephthah made his vow, that he won the war, that his daughter was the first to greet him, and then that he fulfilled his promise. But what does that mean? Did Jephthah truly sacrifice his only child on an altar? Or is there another explanation? Tonight, we unravel the mystery, because the answer is not as simple as it seems. For centuries, many have believed that Jephthah's daughter was literally sacrificed, burned as an offering to God, just as he vowed. Why? Because the text in Judges 11 verse 39 says, "He did to her according to the vow he had made." If we take this at face value, it seems clear. Jephthah made a vow, and he kept it. The ancient world was a brutal place. Human sacrifice, while condemned in Israel, was practiced by surrounding nations. Could Jephthah have followed through, believing he had no choice? Some say yes. That his sense of honor, his absolute belief in keeping a vow to God, meant he was willing to pay even the highest price. That he believed breaking his word to the Lord would bring a curse upon him and his people. And so, with unimaginable sorrow, he carried out the sacrifice. If this is true, Jephthah's story is not just tragic. It is horrifying. But there is another possibility, one that paints a different picture, one that suggests Jephthah's daughter did not die that day. Some scholars believe that Jephthah did not kill his daughter, but rather dedicated her to lifelong service to God. In this view, her sacrifice was not of life, but of a normal future. Why do they believe this? Because when she asks for time to mourn, she doesn't say, "Let me mourn my life." She says, "Let me mourn my virginity." This is key. If she were about to die, wouldn't she grieve her life? Her family? The short years she had lived? But no, she mourns that she will never marry, never have children. This suggests that instead of being killed, she was sent to serve God in lifelong devotion, never to wed, never to bear descendants, never to continue Jephthah's bloodline. And in ancient Israel, for a woman, this was a different kind of death. Not of the body, but of the future. Which one is true? So, did Jephthah really sacrifice his daughter? Or was she given to God in a different way? The Bible doesn't give us a clear answer. And perhaps that's intentional. Perhaps the story is meant to leave us wrestling with its meaning, to force us to ask questions about faith, vows, and consequences. Either way, one thing is certain. Jephthah's promise to God changed his life forever, and history has never forgotten it. But before we draw our final conclusions, there is one last lesson to learn. Because the story, it isn't just about Jephthah, it's about us. A lesson for eternity. What does this story mean for us? Thousands of years have passed since Jephthah walked the earth, since he made his vow, since he won his battle, since he lost what mattered most. But his story hasn't faded. Why? Because it still speaks to us today. This isn't just ancient history. It's a warning, a mirror, a challenge. And if we're willing to listen, Jephthah's story can change the way we see our own lives. Jephthah teaches us something we all know, but often forget. Words have power, and once spoken, they can't always be taken back. Think about it. How many times have we made rash promises without thinking of the consequences? I swear, I'll never forgive you. I promise I'll always be there. If I just get this one thing, I'll do anything. We say these things in the heat of the moment, in desperation, in fear. But what happens when we're forced to follow through? What happens when the cost of our words comes knocking? Jephthah made a vow to secure victory, and he got what he wanted. But he never stopped to ask, at what cost? Faith versus foolishness, where do we draw the line? Jephthah's story also raises another painful question. Was he a man of faith or a man of foolishness? Was his vow an act of devotion? Or was it reckless, unnecessary, and tragic? Because here's the truth, God never asked him to make that vow. Nowhere in the Bible does God demand such a deal. Jephthah thought he needed to bargain with God for victory. But did he? Or was God going to give him victory regardless because he had already been chosen to lead? How often do we do the same? How often do we think we need to earn God's favor? If I just pray harder. If I just prove myself. If I just make the sacrifice. But God doesn't work on human bargains. His love, his plans, his purposes, they are not transactions. And sometimes in our attempt to control the outcome, we create our own disasters. There's one last lesson, and it's the hardest one to hear. Jephthah had a choice. Yes, he made a vow, but could he have gone back on it? Some say no, that breaking a vow to God would have been worse than anything else. But others believe he could have humbled himself and asked for mercy, that he could have admitted his mistake and begged for forgiveness. But he didn't, because pride is a powerful thing. It's easier to suffer than to admit we were wrong. And so Jephthah held to his promise even when it cost him everything. What will we learn? Jephthah's story is uncomfortable. It doesn't have a happy ending. But that's what makes it so powerful, because it forces us to ask the hard questions. Do we think before we speak? Do we try to bargain with God instead of trusting him? Are we willing to admit when we're wrong? Or does our pride keep us trapped in bad decisions? Jephthah didn't get a second chance, but we do. The question is, will we take it? Will you take the lesson? Jephthah's story is one of victory and loss, faith and tragedy, promises and consequences. It's not just history. It's a reminder that our words matter, that our choices have weight, that sometimes the greatest battles we fight aren't against enemies, but against ourselves. And if this story made you think, if it challenged you, moved you, or made you question what you thought you knew, then there's more. Subscribe to the channel for more deep, thought-provoking stories from the Bible and beyond. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about us. And there's still so much more to uncover. Subscribe now. Let's keep exploring together.